Landon Fox leaned against the observation deck's railing, watching the distant stars flicker. The station hung at the edge of human-explored space, orbiting a lonely red dwarf. Beyond it lay the uncharted frontier and, more importantly, the territory of the Eldraxians. This was supposed to be a historic moment, the first face-to-face diplomatic meeting between their two species. For Landon, it just felt tense. The stakes were enormous and the Eldraxians weren't known for their patience. He turned as the chamber doors hissed open. Two Eldraxians entered, their tall forms clad in shimmering robes that looked like liquid metal. Their violet-hued skin caught the light, giving them an otherworldly glow. Landon's hand drifted to his collar, smoothing a non-existent wrinkle in his uniform. Ambassador Fox, announced the lead Eldraxian, her voice cool and measured. I am Orvara, envoy of the Eldraxian High Council. This is my second, Jacther. The male who accompanied her gave a slight nod, his eyes scanning the room with a look that bordered on disdain. Landon stepped forward and extended a hand. It's an honor, envoy Orvara. Welcome aboard the Karina station. Orvara tilted her head, ignoring the offered hand. We prefer not to begin discussions with unnecessary pleasantries. Let us proceed to the conference chamber. Landon let his hand drop to his side, feeling a flicker of annoyance. Of course, he said, motioning toward the chamber doors. Right this way. As they walked, Orvara maintained a stiff, regal posture, her long strides perfectly measured. Jacther kept close behind her, his gaze flitting between Landon and the station crew members who passed them. Landon stole a glance at his own second-in-command, Lieutenant Nate Sanders. Nate was a younger officer known for his sharp wit and knack for handling tense situations. Landon had chosen him for this mission not only because he was capable but because he knew Nate could help keep things grounded. When they reached the conference chamber, Landon gestured for the Eldraxians to take their seats. Orvara and Jacther sat with the poise of royalty, their expressions revealing nothing. Landon and Nate took their places across the table. Let's begin by discussing our shared interests in this sector, Landon said, his voice calm but firm. We understand that the Eldraxian people value independence, but I believe we can find ways to cooperate without infringing on your autonomy. Orvara's gaze sharpened. Independence is not merely a value, it is our foundation. We will not tolerate any arrangement that compromises our sovereignty. Landon kept his tone steady. Nor would we expect you to. Humanity's primary interest is mutual growth, expanding trade networks, sharing technology that benefits both our worlds. No one is suggesting a loss of control on either side. Jacther folded his arms, his expression skeptical. Your words are smooth, Ambassador, but intentions are another matter. Why should we trust that humanity's expansion will not eventually threaten Eldraxian territory? Nate leaned forward slightly. Jacther, if I may, it's not just about expansion. We're looking to establish a dialogue, a framework to address any concerns before they become conflicts. That benefits both sides. Jacther didn't respond immediately and Orvara placed a hand on the table, drawing everyone's attention. Your second-in-command speaks with more clarity than you do, Ambassador, she said, a faint smirk tugging at the corner of her lips. Landon fought back a grin. I keep good people around me for a reason. Orvara's expression grew serious again. Even so, words must be backed by actions. Your proposal to share trade routes is one thing, but what guarantees can you offer that your settlers will not encroach on our sacred territories? We can draft agreements that clearly outline boundaries, Landon said. Transparent protocols that ensure mutual respect. And we'll enforce those agreements with penalties for any violations. If necessary, we can establish joint monitoring teams, equal representation from both sides. Orvara leaned back slightly, her eyes narrowing as she considered the idea. Jacther, however, looked unimpressed. And what of the so-called rogue human factions? The ones who refuse to follow your central authority? Your assurances mean little if you cannot control your own people. Landon's jaw tightened, but Nate spoke before he could. We're aware of the rogue elements and we've taken measures to contain them. Our willingness to meet with you here on neutral ground should demonstrate our commitment to accountability. The discussion continued for hours, the dialogue at times heated, at others cautiously optimistic. Landon and Nate worked together seamlessly, Landon taking the lead on strategy while Nate stepped in to de-escalate tensions. Orvara remained composed, though she frequently challenged their points, while Jacther seemed to relish pointing out potential flaws. Eventually, the talks concluded for the day, and both sides agreed to reconvene after a brief recess. As the Eldraxians departed, Landon slumped back in his chair, rubbing his temples. That went okay, he said, looking at Nate. Okay? I'd say it went better than expected. Orvara's tough, but she's not unreasonable. And did you see the look on Jackthar's face when you mentioned joint monitoring teams? I think that actually got through to them. Landon chuckled. I guess you're right. She's still sizing us up, though. She probably thinks I'm too stubborn. Yeah, well, maybe stubbornness is what it'll take, Nate said. You're not letting them push you around, but you're not being a hard-ass either. That's exactly what we need right now. Landon nodded. Thanks, Nate. I just hope tomorrow goes as well. They're not going to give us many chances to prove ourselves. Nate grinned. We'll be ready. You handle the big picture diplomacy and I'll keep them from storming out of the room. Landon laughed. Deal. Now let's grab some food before I have to face another round with Orvara. I have a feeling she's not done testing us yet. The next morning, Landon entered the conference chamber feeling cautiously optimistic. Yesterday's talks had been tense, but they'd ended on a neutral note, no outright refusals, no walkouts. That was progress, albeit small. Nate was already waiting for him inside, standing near the viewport that overlooked the station's docking ring. The Earth's sun was just a faint dot from this distance, and the view offered a humbling reminder of how far they were from home. Think they're going to bite today? Nate asked, turning as Landon approached. They might nibble, Landon replied, cracking a wry smile. Just don't expect them to dive in headfirst. Fair enough, Nate said. How do you want to play it? We focus on the shared concerns, the pirates, the trade disruptions, Landon said. If we can show them that cooperation solves a problem they can't handle alone, we'll have a stronger foundation for the rest of our proposals. Before Nate could respond, the chamber doors slid open and Orvara entered with Jackther at her side. Today, she wore a dark, flowing tunic that shimmered with faint patterns whenever she moved. Jackthar's attire was more subdued, but his posture remained as sharp as ever, his eyes scanning the room as though searching for a hidden threat. Ambassador Fox, Orvara said, inclining her head slightly. Lieutenant Sanders, I trust you are prepared to continue our discussions. Always, Landon said, stepping forward. Please have a seat. The four of them took their places around the polished table. Orvara folded her hands neatly in front of her while Jackther leaned back, his expression skeptical as ever. Landon glanced at Nate, who gave him a quick nod, a silent signal that they were ready to start. Before we continue our discussion on trade routes, Landon began, I'd like to address the issue of the recent pirate attacks. We've reviewed the reports from your freighters and it's clear that these raiders are targeting Eldraxian supply lines specifically. We've encountered similar groups on our own routes and we've developed strategies to counter them. If you're open to sharing data, we might be able to coordinate our efforts. Orvara's expression remained neutral, but she leaned forward slightly. And how would such coordination work, Ambassador? Are you suggesting joint patrols? Not necessarily, Landon said. We understand the importance of maintaining your independence. But if we share intelligence, locations of pirate hideouts, known attack patterns, even cargo manifests, we can anticipate their moves and adapt our routes accordingly. With the right planning, we can outmaneuver them without resorting to direct combat. Jackthar's brow furrowed. And what guarantees do we have that your intelligence is reliable? If we rely on your information and it proves false, we risk losing more than just cargo. That's a fair concern, Nate said, stepping in. We propose a phased approach. We start with a small exchange, limited data on non-critical routes. If that information proves accurate, we expand the collaboration. It's low risk for both sides. Orvara considered this for a moment. A measured approach is not without merit, she admitted. However, the issue of trust remains. Your people have not always been forthcoming with their intentions. How can we be certain that your intelligence sharing is not a precursor to further entanglements? Landon took a deep breath. I can't promise that mistakes won't happen, no one can. But what I can offer is transparency. We're willing to show you how we gather our data, even let your analysts verify it independently. Our goal isn't to control your trade routes, it's to ensure that neither of us falls victim to these pirate groups again. Orvara's violet eyes fixed on him, unblinking. Your words carry weight, Ambassador. We shall see if your actions match them. Landon nodded. That's all I'm asking for, a chance to prove that this partnership can work. Jackther snorted softly. Partnership. A word too often used and too rarely honored. Then we'll just have to change that, won't we? Nate said with a faint smile. Look, we know it's not going to happen overnight. But every step forward, no matter how small, it gets us closer to something meaningful. That's worth trying, isn't it? Orvara glanced at Jackther, then back at Landon and Nate. Very well. We will provide a limited data set for you to review. In return, you will share intelligence on the known pirate strongholds in this sector. We will assess the accuracy of your information before proceeding further. Landon allowed himself a small smile. Agreed. We'll have the data compiled and ready for you within the hour. The discussion shifted after that. Orvara and Jackther remained cautious, but there was a subtle change in their tone. They weren't just dismissing every suggestion outright. Instead, they began to ask more detailed questions about the specifics of trade route optimization, the potential economic benefits of shared technology exchanges, and the long-term stability of their respective supply chains. Landon and Nate worked as a team, with Landon handling the broader strategic points and Nate diving into the logistical details. The hours stretched on, but the progress was tangible. By the end of the day, they had a tentative agreement on the initial intelligence exchange and a framework for future discussions. When the meeting finally adjourned, Landon felt a cautious sense of accomplishment. As Orvara and Jackther stood to leave, she turned to Landon. This first step is a small one, Ambassador. The road ahead will be far more challenging. I wouldn't expect anything less, Landon said. But at least we're on the road. Orvara's expression softened ever so slightly. Indeed. Until tomorrow. She and Jackther left the chamber, their movements as graceful as ever. Landon and Nate remained behind, reviewing the notes they'd taken and discussing the next steps. Well, Nate said, that went better than expected. Landon nodded. They're cautious, but I think they see the value in working together. We just have to keep building on this. You think Orvara's starting to trust you? Nate asked. Maybe, Landon said. She's not sold yet, but she's listening. That's a start. Nate grinned. You've got this, boss. I'll go prep that data for the exchange. Thanks, Nate, Landon said. Let's keep this momentum going. As Nate left to handle the data, Landon sat back in his chair, staring out at the stars beyond the viewport. The challenges ahead were daunting, but for the first time it felt like progress was possible. They'd taken the first step toward building something new, and if they could keep working together, who knew what they might accomplish? In the days that followed the initial exchange of intelligence, Landon found himself crossing paths with Orvara more frequently. At first, their interactions were brief and formal, centered entirely on refining protocols and double-checking data. But as their joint efforts began to yield small victories, fewer pirate raids, more secure trade routes, something began to shift. Their conversations stretched beyond strategy, and Landon started to notice the faint glimmer of curiosity in Orvara's usually reserved demeanor. Late one evening, Landon found himself in the observation deck again, reviewing a detailed map of the sector's trade lanes. Nate was nearby, pacing as he read aloud from his notes. Okay, so the last reported pirate activity was 3 days ago near the Gar-Axis Nebula. Our joint patrols adjusted their routes accordingly, and no incidents have been reported since. That's what, the 4th clean run this week. 5th, Landon corrected, rubbing his temples. Still, it's early. They might just be regrouping. Or they're starting to think twice before targeting these routes, Nate said. That's progress, right? Landon nodded, but he didn't look away from the map. Sure. Progress. Let's just hope it lasts. Before Nate could reply, the door slid open and Orvara entered the room. She moved quietly, her gaze immediately drawn to the star map. Landon glanced up, startled, and straightened. Envoy Orvara. I didn't realize we had a meeting scheduled. We do not, she said, her voice calm. I came to review the latest route adjustments. Our analysts suggested that your most recent recommendations have been effective. Effective enough, Nate said, shooting Landon a quick look. I'll leave you two to discuss the details. With that, he gathered his datapad and exited, leaving Landon and Orvara alone. Landon gestured toward the map. Feel free to take a closer look. I was just going over it myself. Orvara approached, standing shoulder to shoulder with him as she examined the map. She tilted her head slightly, her eyes narrowing in concentration. This pattern here, she said, pointing to a cluster of stars, suggests that the pirates are regrouping further out. It may explain why there have been fewer attacks in this area. That's what I was thinking, Landon said. If we can predict where they'll strike next, we can reposition our patrols. Orvara nodded, and for a moment, the two of them were silent, focused entirely on the glowing lines of the trade routes. Then she broke the silence. You have been persistent, Ambassador. Stubborn, even. Landon raised an eyebrow. Is that a compliment or a critique? A statement of fact, she said, her lips curling into a faint smile. Stubbornness is not always a flaw. Sometimes it is necessary. You have not given up on this alliance, even when the odds seemed against you. Well, I'm not the only one who's stuck with it, Landon said. You could have walked away from the table at any time. Perhaps, Orvara said. But there is merit in persistence, even in the face of uncertainty. Landon glanced at her, noting the softened lines of her face, the way her usual formality seemed to have eased. You know, when we first met, I thought you saw me as just another human bureaucrat here to waste your time. "And what do you think now?" she asked, her tone light but probing. "I think you're a lot more open-minded than you let on," Landon said. "And maybe a little more curious about us than you'd admit." She considered his words, her gaze never leaving his. "Curiosity is not a weakness, Ambassador. It is the first step toward understanding." They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of their shared experiences hanging between them. Landon felt a strange sense of camaraderie growing, one that had been forged not through grand gestures or dramatic events, but through countless small interactions. He realized that he respected Orvara not just for her intelligence, but for her willingness to engage, to challenge him, to adapt when it mattered most. "Orvara," he said, breaking the silence, "do you ever feel like this is bigger than just trade routes and pirate attacks?" She arched a brow. "What do you mean?" "I mean us humans and Eldraxians. Working together like this. It feels like we're building something more than just a practical arrangement. Like we're laying the foundation for something that could change the way our people see each other." She studied him carefully, her expression unreadable. "Change does not come easily, Ambassador. But it begins with understanding. Perhaps this is the start of something larger. Only time will tell." Landon smiled. "You know, for someone who's usually so formal, you're surprisingly optimistic." "Optimism and realism are not mutually exclusive," Orvara said. "I simply choose my words carefully." "Fair enough," he said. "I just didn't expect this from you. Back when we started, I thought you'd be the first one to throw in the towel. And I thought you would be too stubborn to listen," she said with a wry grin. "Yet here we are." They shared a quiet laugh, the tension that had defined their earlier interactions now replaced by a tentative ease. For the first time, Landon felt like they weren't just two diplomats negotiating terms, they were two individuals slowly building trust. And though the challenges ahead were still daunting, he found himself more willing than ever to face them, knowing that they were no longer facing them alone. The briefing room was unusually quiet. Landon and Nate sat across from each other, surrounded by holographic displays of Eldraxian trade routes and pirate activity. Orvara and Jackther arrived moments later, their footsteps echoing in the near-silent chamber. As the Eldraxian envoys settled into their seats, Landon exchanged a quick glance with Nate. It was time to finalize the terms they'd spent weeks negotiating, and the atmosphere was thick with anticipation. Landon tapped a console, bringing up the latest intelligence report. "Our analysts have confirmed that the majority of pirate activity has shifted to the outer sector. With your data and ours combined, we've been able to chart their new paths. These trade routes," he gestured to a glowing corridor on the map, "are now secure." Orvara studied the hologram carefully. "You claim they are secure, but what measures have you taken to ensure that stability remains?" Nate leaned forward, his tone measured. "We've coordinated with your patrols to cover the most vulnerable points. The joint monitoring teams have been running continuous sweeps, and the last 3 convoys passed through without incident. It's not just a short-term fix, it's a framework we can keep using." "And your rogue factions?" He strengthened to pose a significant threat. Jackther raised a skeptical eyebrow, but Orvara spoke before he could press further. "These results are promising. However, trust must be built over time. I am still not fully convinced that these measures will hold. It will require sustained cooperation." "That's exactly what we're proposing," Landon said. "A sustained partnership, one that evolves as the situation changes. We're not claiming perfection, but we've shown we can adapt." Orvara's gaze lingered on Landon for a moment before she nodded. "You have made progress. It is not enough to declare victory, but it is a foundation to build upon." "We'll take it," Nate said with a smile. "A foundation is a start." With the immediate negotiations concluded, the 4 of them lingered in the room. The formalities had been set aside, replaced by a tentative camaraderie. Jackther, while still wary, had grown less combative, and Orvara's demeanor was no longer as rigid as it had been at the outset. It was as if the weeks of working together had softened the edges of their professional rivalry. As they reviewed the final details, Orvara turned to Landon. "Ambassador, may I speak with you privately for a moment?" Landon glanced at Nate, who gave him a slight nod and left the room with Jackther. Once they were alone, Orvara crossed her arms, her expression thoughtful. "Ambassador Fox, you are persistent to a fault," she began. "When we first met, I thought your determination would be your undoing. Yet now, I see it as also your strength." Landon tilted his head. "Was that a compliment?" "It was an observation," she said, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "You have demonstrated a willingness to adapt without abandoning your principles. It is a quality that I have come to respect." "I could say the same about you," Landon replied. "You've stuck to your beliefs, but you've also been willing to meet us halfway. That's no small thing." They stood in silence for a moment, the tension between them now more a shared understanding than a barrier. Then Orvara spoke again, her voice softer. Tell me, Ambassador, why do you continue to push so hard for this alliance? Surely you have other matters to attend to back on your homeworld. Landon considered her question carefully. Because I believe in what we're building here. This isn't just about trade routes or security measures. It's about proving that two very different peoples can work together, find common ground, and create something that benefits us all. It might sound idealistic, but if we don't try, we'll never know what's possible. Orvara regarded him for a long moment, then nodded. A noble sentiment. Perhaps one worth pursuing. She turned to leave, but as she reached the door, she paused. We reconvene tomorrow at first light. I trust you will be prepared. Always, Landon said with a small smile. See you then, Envoy. As she left, Landon felt a renewed sense of determination. This partnership wasn't perfect, and there were still many hurdles to overcome, but for the first time it felt like they were truly on the same side. And that, he thought, was worth every stubborn step along the way. The control room was alive with muted conversations and the hum of equipment. Landon stood at the main console reviewing the latest reports on cargo traffic and patrol patterns. Across the room, Nate monitored an incoming transmission from one of their joint reconnaissance teams. The steady pace of progress had given everyone a sense of cautious optimism except for Landon. He couldn't help but wonder if the delicate balance they'd achieved would last. Lieutenant, Landon said, glancing over his shoulder at Nate, anything new from the field? Nate tapped at his console, then shook his head. No major changes. The routes remain secure, and the teams haven't reported any pirate activity since the last sweep. Good, Landon said. But we can't let our guard down. If the pirates have gone quiet, it probably means they're regrouping. As if on cue, the door to the control room slid open and Orvara entered with Jackther close behind. Landon greeted them with a nod. Envoy Orvara, Jackther. I wasn't expecting you so early. We felt it was prudent to review the patrol rotations personally, Orvara said. Your people have been thorough, but we need to ensure that every measure is accounted for. Jackther folded his arms, his expression as impassive as ever. It is our responsibility to verify all claims. Even the smallest oversight could cost us dearly. Nate raised an eyebrow but said nothing. Landon gestured to the main display. You're welcome to review the logs. Our patrols have followed the agreed-upon routes to the letter. If there's anything you feel needs adjustment, we can address it now. Orvara stepped forward, her gaze sweeping over the data on the screen. The positioning is satisfactory, she said after a moment. However, we should consider increasing the frequency of long-range scans. If the pirates are regrouping, we must detect their movements early. We've already increased the scan intervals, Nate pointed out. Any more, and we risk overwhelming the system with false positives. That may be true, Orvara said, but it is a risk we must take. Vigilance is our best defense. Jackther snorted softly. Your system's limitations should not dictate our strategy. Hold on a second, Nate said, turning to face Jackther. We're the ones running those scans. If you have a better way, feel free to share it, but don't act like we're slacking off. Landon held up a hand. Nate, let's keep this productive. He turned to Jackther. Lieutenant Sanders makes a good point. We're not dismissing your concerns, but we need to approach this practically. If we flood our sensors with too much data, we could miss the real threats. Orvara studied the screen again, then nodded. A balanced approach, then. Increase the scans slightly, but not to the point of saturation. I trust you can manage that. Landon nodded. We'll adjust the intervals. If you have specific parameters in mind, send them over and we'll incorporate them into the system. Jackther frowned but said nothing more. Orvara stepped back from the console, her expression thoughtful. You continue to surprise me, Ambassador. I did not expect such flexibility from you. Flexibility is a two-way street, Landon said. We've both had to adjust our expectations to make this work. Nate chimed in. And if we keep focusing on what we can do together rather than what divides us, we'll keep moving forward. Orvara gave a small, almost imperceptible smile. Perhaps you are right. For now, let us proceed with the adjustments and see if the increased vigilance yields results. The conversation shifted to more technical details, with Nate and Jackther debating sensor calibration while Orvara and Landon discussed the potential impacts of changing patrol routes. Despite the occasional disagreement, the atmosphere was far less tense than it had been in the beginning. The weeks of cooperation had created a level of mutual respect that made such discussions possible. As they wrapped up the session, Orvara turned to Landon. Ambassador, may I speak with you privately once again? Of course, Landon said, gesturing toward a quieter corner of the control room. Once they were alone, Orvara folded her hands in front of her. I must admit, I was not certain this partnership would endure as long as it has. You have proven more persistent than I anticipated. Persistent is just a polite way of saying stubborn, Landon said with a wry smile. Perhaps, Orvara said, her voice softening. But stubbornness, when guided by purpose, can be a strength. I see now that your insistence was not born of arrogance, but of conviction. It is a quality that has served you and this alliance well. Landon tilted his head slightly. That almost sounds like another compliment. Do not let it go to your head, Orvara said, though there was a hint of amusement in her tone. Your determination is admirable, but it must continue to be matched by action. It will be, Landon said. We're in this together. I'm not about to back down now. Orvara studied him for a moment longer before nodding. Very well. Let us see what we can achieve. With that, she turned and left the room, leaving Landon with a renewed sense of purpose. The challenges ahead would be difficult, but with each step, they were proving that cooperation wasn't just possible, it was already happening. And as long as they kept working together, there was no telling how far they could go.